Okay, this is part 3 of episode 5.
We will continue with the Apollo missions 6 through 10. Apollo 6 was on the Saturn V rocket, unmanned, and it was in April 4th, 1968.
And there were severe vibrations that caused two of the second stage engines to shut down before they were supposed to, and the third stage restart engine to fail. And they used an engine to achieve high-speed re-entry. And NASA identified what caused the vibrations, and they fixed it, and they declared that Saturn V was ready to have a manned flight.
And so, as most of you will know, JFK, John F. Kennedy, was the president that gave the famous speech saying that we're going to go to the moon within the decade. And so you can tell that 1968 is getting close to the end of the decade, and there hasn't been a man on the moon. And so within 1968, there were 3 missions, which is a lot, because normally it's like 1 mission a year nowadays. And so there was Apollo 7 and 8 that were also in 1968. Now, Apollo 7 used the Saturn 1B rocket, and it had a successful 11-day flight and first live television broadcast from space.
The launch date was October 11th of 1968. The crew was Walter Schirra, Don Aceel, and Walter Cunningham.
And Apollo 8 was a very famous mission. They took the famous picture of the Earthrise. Apollo 8 was a mission where they wanted to go to the moon. They orbited the moon. So on their way, they were orbiting. They went all the way around the moon. And I think it was Jim Lovell that took the famous picture of the moon and the Earth. And people say that picture put things in perspective to show what Earth really looked like in the ocean of space.
And let's keep in mind the significance of this flight was this was the first ever flight beyond low Earth orbit. So they completed 10 lunar orbits, and the launch date was December 21st, 1968. The crew was Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders.
And on Apollo 8, they had a live television broadcast, which they read the first few verses of Genesis. And while they were headed home, NASA got a bunch of letters from people sending in about the picture they took. And they said one of their favorite ones was from just an old lady of no certain importance, and she said Apollo 8 in this picture saved the 1968, because during that time we were in Vietnam, and that was the assassination of the president, and it was a bad time. And so at the end, December 21st, they thought that this picture saved that whole year. And so moving on to Apollo 9, they also used the Saturn V rocket, and they did 10 days in Earth's orbit, and they demonstrated a
lunar module propulsion.
Yeah, lunar module propulsion. And they rendezvoused and docked with another capsule, and they did EVAs to test the lunar module life support system.
Okay, the launch date was March 3rd of 1969. So we're getting really close to needing to go to the moon now. The crew was James McDivitt, David Scott, and Russell Schweickart.
And so Next was Apollo 10, which also used the Saturn V rocket. The Apollo 10 was considered the dress rehearsal for Apollo 11. They did everything that Apollo 11 would do except land on the moon.
And they didn't give them enough fuel to actually land.
No, they gave them enough fuel to land, but not to get off if they did land. So they did that as a deterrent. But I don't think they told them that, which could have been bad.
And they got to within 15.6 kilometers of the lunar surface. And that was on May 18th of 1969. The crew was Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Gene Cernan.
Yep. And so that almost concludes this episode this part of Apollo 6 through 10. At the end of this one, I want to talk about the creation, how they created the lunar module. It's a funny story how it got created. I can't remember the guy's name, but he drew up all these plans on what the best thing would be to land on the moon with. And some guy heard about it. I think it was a German scientist that made the plans, and some guy heard about it, and he showed it to a NASA official, and it kind of just was a laughing stock to everybody in NASA. They all, like, how can this thing land on the moon? And so a guy threw it away, and it landed on a guy's desk, a very important guy in NASA headquarters, and he liked it, and that's what they proposed to make the module like. And so they had to first create it, and one of the main problems was weight management. And so the first design had 5 legs, which they cut down to 4, and no windows, so they put windows in, and they had to move the door around the module to fit the backpacks and for the people to get out. And then one of the major designs was standing up. They didn't think that they could make the astronauts stand up in the module, but they did, and that made it so they had smaller windows, which would cut down on a lot of weight.
And the walls were extremely thin in order to cut down the cost. Like, so thin you would think that it would be impossible to maintain, to keep the thing from falling apart, basically.
But there was a saying that, I guess not really a saying, but that's just what everybody said, is that you couldn't drop a screwdriver in the module, or else it'd go straight through the floor. But, the astronauts had to stand on it and stuff, but it was in space, so that might have been true. And so that will conclude this part. Thank you.